A system at breaking point. We reveal the growing scale of Britain's social care crisis.
Do you think you need to be in a care home?
No.
We hear from those unable to go home and others stuck in hospital because of a shortage of people to care for them. Also tonight.
Happy birthday to you.
A teenager guilty of murdering a father who left his twin daughter's birthday to help a homeless man. Fury in the Commons. Tory MP Owen Paterson's suspension for breaking lobbying rules is blocked by a government-backed vote. And 4-year-old Cleo Smith, who went missing in the Australian outback, is reunited with her family.
I wanted to be absolutely sure it was her, so I said, "What's your name?" And she said, "My name's Cleo."
This is the ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. The crisis in social care in the UK has been the subject of growing concern ever since the start of the pandemic. But tonight, ITV News can exclusively reveal the hard facts showing just how deep the crisis is. Using freedom of information requests, we have discovered that the number of adults on the social care waiting list has almost doubled in just 1 year. But as our UK editor Paul Brand reports, in some areas the situation is even starker.
In room 20, 88-year-old Myra Hall has made herself a home, but it is not her own. 2 doors down, 72-year-old Florence Louth is also living at Knoll Manor in Morley, but she too shouldn't be here. Both women have had to stay in the care home for weeks after leaving hospital because there aren't any carers in the community to help them move back to their own houses.
Do you think you need to be in a care home?
No. No, I don't. I can manage everything, you know. I might only have them few years left. Want to make the best of them, don't I?
I miss seeing my kids, my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, and going out and enjoying myself with my family.
Around a fifth of these rooms are occupied by people who don't need to be here, housed in a care home, because like thousands of others, they can't get care in their own home.
For the first time, ITV News can quantify the crisis in care. A snapshot from 87 councils across the UK shows that on a single day last September, just over 5,000 people were waiting for care. But by this September, that had nearly doubled to almost 10,000 people. In Dundee, the waiting list has grown 7-fold in 2 years. In Salford, it's almost 15 times longer, and in Cheshire East, almost 25 times longer. Where Myra and Florence live in Leeds, waiting lists are up 4-fold.
We've never known it like this before. It is unprecedented, and it's the result of COVID. It's the result of 10 years of cuts to local government funding. It's the fact that we cannot compete on wages with retail and hospitality.
You want to fix it and you can't fix it.
From sobbing staff to anger and exhaustion.
I don't want to do all these hours. I want a life.
ITV News has been reporting for months on the staffing crisis in care, caused mostly by poor pay, though not according to the Care Minister.
First of all, they need recognition and value. That's the most important thing for anybody.
More important than their pay?
I think it is, actually, if you look at all the evidence. The most important thing for anybody in any workplace is for actually feeling valued and feeling recognised for what you do.
But thousands will remain stuck like Myra and Florence for as long as carers are left worrying about putting food on their own tables.
Paul, clearly a big problem here. What's the remedy to this crisis?
Well, it's simple in a way. If we want more care, we need more carers, over 100,000 more, in fact. And today the government has launched quite a substantial recruitment campaign. It's also been putting in hundreds of millions of pounds extra into the sector to try and attract staff. But the care sector tells me that will only allow them to stand still because of rising costs. They can't hike wages relative to other sectors, which means that companies are particularly low on staff right now. We spoke to one provider today who had to turn down a woman with terminal cancer for care. She wanted to come and die in her own home. They couldn't care for her. She had to die in hospital. Those are the kind of choices carers do not want to be making. They do love their jobs, but they do also have to care about paying their own bills.
Really difficult, Paul. Thank you. A 16-year-old boy was found guilty today of murdering a father who left his twin daughter's birthday party to help a homeless man being harassed by a group of youths. The court heard how James Gibbons, who was 34, was stabbed 4 times just outside his home by the defendant, who cannot be named for legal reasons. Rebecca Barry reports.
Happy birthday to you.
This is James Gibbons, a father of 4, celebrating his twin daughter's 2nd birthday. But shortly after this video was taken, he was murdered just metres from his home.
James was a grafter, a real hard-working man who wanted nothing else but to provide for his family.
He'd gone outside his house in Leyden in Essex to challenge a group of teenagers harassing a homeless man when he was stabbed 4 times by a 16-year-old boy.
James was a loving son, a devoted father to his 4 children, a protective brother, uncle, cousin, and a perfect partner and soulmate to his fiancée Victoria.
James had given the homeless man some food from his barbecue. When a group started bullying the man, he stepped in, but it cost him his life. Today, a 16-year-old boy who can't be named was found guilty of his murder. Deliberately securing a weapon, said the prosecution, then returning to the scene, then stabbing a man, not once, not twice, but 4 times, we say can only have been accompanied by an intent to cause really serious harm.
James did not like bullies, and he would always be the one who would protect and look out for vulnerable people. We are so proud of him. He is our hero.
For future birthdays, his 4 children won't have their dad. But it seems he leaves them all with memories of a father they can be proud of. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Prince Andrew learned today when the sexual assault case against him might go on trial. A judge in New York said next autumn is the most likely time for the hearing of the civil lawsuit being brought by Prince Andrew's accuser, Virginia Giuffre. He told the legal teams of both parties the date would probably be September to December 2022. Prince Andrew denies the allegations. Amid heated exchanges today, MPs decided against the immediate suspension of a former Conservative minister found guilty of breaking parliamentary rules on paid lobbying. They voted instead for a government-backed review of Parliament's disciplinary process. More now from our political correspondent, Libby Wiener.
It is a corrupt practice.
The worst excesses of 1990s Tory sleaze.
It's not about letting anyone off.
Feelings were running high, not surprisingly. At stake, how MPs police themselves and whether a former minister should escape punishment for breaching lobbying rules. In the end, the vote was close.
The ayes to the right, 250. The noes to the left, 232.
Cries of shame echoed round the chamber as the result was announced. Parliament had just voted to set up a new system after the current Committee on Standards had said Owen Paterson should be suspended. Earlier, Labour's deputy leader went on the attack.
It's one rule for everybody else and one rule for the Tory Conservatives.
But the Prime Minister defended Mr Paterson.
The issue in this case is whether a member of this House had a fair opportunity to make representations in this case, or whether as a matter of natural justice, our procedures in this House allow for proper appeal, Mr Speaker.
Last week's report by MPs was categorical. The committee found that Mr Patterson's actions were an egregious case of paid advocacy, that he repeatedly used his privileged position to benefit to companies for whom he was a paid consultant, and that this has brought the House into disrepute. He maintains the process wasn't fair, but the chair of the committee said it was wrong to change the system now.
But if the public believe that we are marking our own homework, our reputation individually and collectively will be tarnished.
Some Tory MPs agreed.
It looks like we're moving the goalposts, and for that reason I can't support it.
But what about Mr Patterson?
You're not at all worried about how it will look to the general public, that you change the rules retrospectively?
Well, if it's portrayed as that, that's the parody, that will look bad. But that is not actually what's happened. What's happened is we have a chance to build a new system where evidence is exchanged, where witnesses are properly interrogated.
Whatever people outside Parliament may think, a new committee of MPs will now hear the case again. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
Finances were the main talking point at the COP26 climate talks today, with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak brandishing a green budget box. He said Britain would lead the way towards a net zero economy by forcing top firms to publish their plans for going green. Well, Rachel Younger is in Glasgow. Rachel, is a plan any clue of how it would work?
Well, right at the heart of it is the Chancellor's plan to stamp out greenwashing, although it must be said that when he arrived here in Glasgow, something rather similar seemed to have happened to his customary red box. But he went on to outline his plan to move towards making it mandatory for the UK's biggest firms to have to publish details of how they intend to achieve their climate change goals. Now, that's because he knows that in the past there have been big accusations that banks and companies have talked the talk but haven't walked the walk. And indeed, on the streets of Glasgow today, we saw some of the biggest protests yet, with demonstrators complaining about the banks in particular, they say, are guilty of exactly that. Now, the Chancellor says they won't be able to do that for much longer, because he told the summit here that by 2022 he will set up a regulatory task force that will prevent companies from being able to use spin. But I think what was also behind some of the demonstrators' anger was this big plan put forward by the former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who has got together 450 of the world's biggest companies who they say will put some of their $130 trillion of wealth towards green investment projects. What critics say, however, is there is nothing in that plan to make it regulatory, to make it credible. They say it's yet another example of greenwashing.
All right, Rachel in Glasgow, thank you. Still to come on the ITV Evening News. We hear from the doctor swapping his scrubs for DJ decks.
I never thought that DJing in my scrubs with a frying pan, with those dance moves, would get me on a tour with Fatboy Slim.
That and the rest of the day's news after the break. Welcome back. ITV News has been given access to trials currently underway at Oxford University of a COVID vaccine in the form of a nasal spray. Scientists hope the new AstraZeneca spray may be even more effective than the current vaccine injection, as our health editor, Emily Morgan, explains.
This is a COVID-19 vaccine, but not as we know it. Oxford University has developed a new nasal spray vaccine. Lyle is one of 42 volunteers taking part in phase 1 of the trials. He's already been fully vaccinated, but has just had another dose of AstraZeneca up his nose.
How was that? You just had the nasal spray. How does that feel?
A lot better than I was expecting. I thought it was going to tingle or something, but I could hardly feel it.
It doesn't taste funny?
It tasted quite sweet. It was quite sort of sugary taste.
Lyle says he wants to be part of the solution to COVID. The team behind this spray aren't promising that yet, but they do hope the benefits will be huge.
There may be some room for improvement. We know the current vaccines do have an effect upon transmission of the virus, but they don't seem to completely stop it. And it may be that by giving a vaccine to the nose that we can be more effective in reducing transmission.
COVID mainly enters the body through the nose and the mouth. So scientists hope that by spraying the vaccine up the nasal passages, it will give additional strengthened immunity in the part of the body where the virus hits first.
Nasal sprays are, of course, more convenient. The flu vaccine is given to children this way, and many people prefer them to needles. It's technology that could also have far-reaching effects.
Looking at immunity in the nose and in the throat and the lungs, as opposed to just standard immunity, could definitely, I think, change the way that we look at vaccines. It does make sense to think that you should vaccinate potentially via the route of infection.
For other viruses?
For other viruses, not just COVID.
Even if the trial is a success, we're at least a year away from having a nasal vaccine. But given we didn't even have a COVID vaccine last year, hopes for success are pretty high. Emily Morgan, ITV News in Oxford.
One of the leading clubs in English cricket, Yorkshire, is under intense pressure tonight over allegations that one of its players was the victim of racist treatment. Several of the club's sponsors today announced they will end their current deals. Well, Sangeeta Lal is at Headingley. Sangeeta, problems mounting for the club's board.
Yes, in a sport that's increasingly trying to show solidarity against racism, things were already looking difficult for the club. And that's only gotten worse over the last 24 hours after one of its biggest sponsors, Emerald, whose name adorns this stadium, says it no longer wants to be associated with the club. Now, this has all come to a head after comments were leaked from a report investigating allegations a racially offensive term was used to describe Azim Rafiq. Now, it's reported those leaked comments dismissed this term as banter and that no disciplinary action would be taken. And it's this lack of action that's disappointed so many people. The Health Secretary Sajid Javid said heads should roll because of it. And earlier today, former England cricketer Monty Panesar said there needs to be much more education about just how offensive these terms can be.
Sometimes there can be a lack of education, a lack of understanding. Maybe, you've got to be quite sensitive to people from, different backgrounds. There's certain terms that you use are actually, would be known as, these are racist terms.
Now, this already had a huge impact, not just financially, but for the reputation of the club too. Emerald says it fundamentally doesn't want to be associated with the club, and they're not the only ones. Tetley says it won't renew its contract, and Yorkshire Tea says it's pulling out too. Now, Yorkshire County Cricket Club hasn't commented yet. The England and Wales Cricket Board says it's now taking on the investigation, and a select committee of MPs is looking at it too later this month in what will be a very uncomfortable time for the club.
Sangeeta, thank you. The family of a woman who died from an overdose after a cut in her benefits has agreed a substantial settlement with a government contractor. Philippa Day was found collapsed at her home last year with a letter nearby from the Department for Work and Pensions rejecting her request for an at-home benefits assessment. An inquest in January concluded that 28 errors were made by authorities managing Miss Day's case. And the train driver, left with life-changing injuries following the Salisbury train crash, acted in an impeccable way, according to his bosses. Crash investigators say 74-year-old Robin Tandy applied his brakes when he saw a red signal. Police in Australia called finding 4-year-old Cleo Smith alive and well 18 days after vanishing from a campsite the miracle we'd all been hoping for. Her mother said the family is whole again. Chloe Keedy reports.
Cleo, my name's Cameron. How are you? Are you okay? We're going to take you to see your mummy and daddy, okay?
Safe in the arms of a very relieved policeman, a little girl who's been missing for nearly 3 weeks.
Breaking news, Cleo miracle.
It is a case that's gripped Australia since 4-year-old Cleo Smith vanished overnight from her family's tent while they were on a camping holiday on the country's west coast. She was eventually found nearly 50 miles away, back in her hometown of Carnarvon, when police raided a house there and found her sitting alone in one of its rooms.
It certainly looked like Cleo. I wanted to be absolutely sure it was her, so I said, "What's your name?" And she didn't answer, and I said, "What's your name?" She didn't answer again, so I asked her a third time, and then she looked at me and she said, "My name's Cleo." Not long after that, got into the car and called Cleo's parents and said, we've got someone here that wants to speak to you.
After being checked over in hospital, a smiling Cleo was allowed to go home. For her mum and dad, the end of 18 days of agony and what was an increasingly desperate search.
If you know anything at all, call the police because we want our daughter back.
Police are now questioning a 36-year-old man in connection with Cleo's disappearance. It's not yet known what happened to her during the time she was missing. But for now, there is simply enormous relief that Cleo has been found. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
Finally, a doctor whose DJing helped inspire the country during the pandemic's darkest days is about to hit the big time. Dr. Kishan Bedalia came off duty, still in his scrubs, to stage his NH sessions in his kitchen. Now he has a record deal. Ben Chapman met him.
It was one of lockdown's more eye-catching moments. A doctor in his scrubs DJing from his kitchen. But however bizarre the sight, Dr. Bedalia's sound caught the attention of some influential ears. 9 months on, he's been signed by a record label and is going on tour with perhaps the most famous DJ.
I never thought that DJing in my scrubs with a frying pan, with those dance moves, would get me on a tour with Fatboy Slim or a record deal. I can't believe that's happening.
Since the summer, he's already appeared at festivals, supporting artists including Example and Rudimental, and fronted campaigns encouraging clubbers to get vaccinated, all while continuing to work full-time as an A&E doctor.
So with all this fame now, do you have any plans to hang up the scrubs?
I can't see myself ever giving up medicine. I will always be a doctor. Music and medicine are my greatest passions, and I'm always going to do both. And I'll always find ways of creating a link between the two.
His first gig with Fatboy Slim next week is a free thank you event for NHS workers. He's also releasing his own track. Not bad for a DJ still fitting in sessions around his hospital shifts. Ben Chapman, ITV News, Birmingham.
Is there a DJ in the house? That is it. Tom is here with News at 10 from me and all the team. Bye-bye.